I'm sure like many of and I air quoted new energies projects that we're seeing, the CCS type stuff or CCUS, and what you guys are working with, the lithium extraction through brine that's going on. The rules of the game aren't necessarily in place yet, from a regulatory and permitting standpoint. So I guess at this point, you guys are working within your lease agreements or whatever your agreements are to provide you sufficient space to do your pooling or spacing. Are there any developments from the regulatory side of things that you're privy to that are advancing and growing, or are you guys really having to work with legislators to help inform them to build the rules?
It's definitely a mix. And so it's going to be very dependent on where you are. So I can't speak to every,
Sure.
geography. But each state's going to have its own view. If you're on federal land, that's going to be a different type of regime as well. Much of what Sage has done initially is we started our first operations in Texas. Reasons we do that is as a startup, we want to be able to get to the field quickly. And
Mhm.
Texas has a very mature permitting and regulatory regime when it comes to oil and gas. They know how to permit wells quickly. Um,
Very
and
business
there's a
friendly as well.
acceptance for what we're doing as well. And so that really helps expedite the speed to getting something online. So we just our first commercial project was actually a long duration energy storage project, which uses the same subsurface technology as geothermal. It's a 3 megawatt facility about an hour south of San Antonio. And I'm mentioning that one because we took that through the permitting regime. And so we got firsthand experience of the process. So from a drilling permit, very short timelines,
Yeah.
permitted by the Texas Railroad Commission. So the same agency that
Mhm.
permits oil and gas is permitting geothermal and our storage well.
Yeah.
We received our injection permit. We received documentation for pit operations. And so we've gone through that. Now, there were some, questions on the application that's like, well, this applies to oil and gas and not us. So there's definitely first of a kind perspective, a learning curve. But working together, we were able to move that process through, and it was great to see.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think Texas has made itself a leader in the space by being an open and friendly market to to companies who are trying to advance energy development. I mean, we see it. It's been a hot spot for, obviously solar and battery storage and wind projects have been a part of Texas energy mix for many years, and obviously oil and gas is the king, here in Texas. But one of the more recent things, and Sage has had some really good press recently, is the data center boom and the expansive and extensive need for power. You guys signed a deal with Meta, or at least press releases went out. I don't know much about the details, but so how does that work? I mean, obviously they need endless power and a lot of it and consistent power. Um, do you when these deals come together, and I don't certainly don't need the details of y'all's deal if anything can't be shared, but in hypothetically, when you have a data center or someone who's got a direct purchase power purchase agreement with a developer like you guys, what drives the location of that data center and that project? Is y'all's technology such that you have a large area that you can work with, or do you have to really be tied? Is there still a geographic component to the location of those types of projects, or is it, hey, it's just a matter of how deep I got to go to be able to align with this existing data center plan that's in place?
It's a great question. So before I get into kind of the location drivers of these, I think you touch on a really good point, which is the market for geothermal. You know, we see two really clear customer types for geothermal power generation. You mentioned the Meta deal, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. But hyperscalers, it's a clear market area. These data centers are coming online. We know the power demand's going to increase. So Goldman Sachs, I read an article and an analysis they had done, and it was about 160% increase in power demand by 2030 from data centers. That's a big, a big
Just from
shift.
data centers alone.
Uh, the EIA is like projecting electricity demand doubling by 2050. So between data centers, population growth, industrialization, power demands increasing, hyperscalers need power. And so that is a big market where we see geothermal power generation. The second market that we're working with is the Department of Defense. And so SAGE just done 3 feasibility studies now for geothermal power generation at different installations with the Air Force, Navy, and the Army. And the goal there is resilient power. So how can you get a fairly small footprint power source, either in a fence line or near a fence line, to be able to get that resilient power that can be connected to the grid, but it doesn't necessarily have to be connected to the
But it
grid.
can be
So we see
dedicated.
those as
Yeah.
two big markets. In
But that
terms of
makes sense strategically, I would imagine, right? If
look,
America's under attack and they attack the grid, this is still dedicated power that can feed a Air Force base or Army installation or whatever the case may be. Is that the kind of the logic behind that?
resilient, defendable power. So I think
Yeah.
that's exactly right. Um, and it's just recognition the demand on the grid is going to be continuing to increase, right? So how do we create that power source in the system? In terms of location, um, it really depends on where you are. The areas that we tend to look would have tend to have more continuity in heat. And so you're a little less concerned about, is it this exact parcel or of land, or is it this parcel of land? Um, in areas of the country and some of the analysis, it's much more sporadic. I think those are future areas for development that needs a little more analysis to figure out what the heat signature is in the
Mhm.
subsurface. But ideally, you're in an area with fairly continuous heat within a depth range. And from there, you don't need to worry as much about the exact coordinate where you're going.
Yeah.
One subsurface feature you do have to watch out for are faults. So you don't want to intersect a fault with what we're trying to do, because a fault is a big lead path for that
Yeah.
reservoir we're trying to create in the
Where there's heat.
subsurface.
Yeah, you have things travel. Okay, so think of it more along the lines of an established, and I'm thinking in oil and gas terms here because we got a layman audience. Established shale area that is generally there will be production within a region of a particular area that consistently will produce heat that's not faulted up. So same kind of logic there would apply. Is that a safe assumption?
That's a fairly safe assumption.
Yeah, the devil from the details, obviously, but
For
um,
sure. What you'd start to look at a bit more when you think location is a little bit less the subsurface attributes, more the surface attributes. So, how far away are you from the right voltage of transmission line? Depending on the size of the facility you're building, you need a certain size line. So, what kind of line are you looking for, and how do you build fairly close to that? Where on the grid can accept the power? Because you do have to go through a grid interconnect process. There can
yeah,
be an upgrade required. Understanding where on the grid you can put the power meter, where is it simplest to interconnect, most efficient, cost wise to interconnect, time wise. Those are factors to start considering.
yeah,
Um,
makes sense.
the other piece is, if you are in the middle of an established oil and gas area, that's helpful because it gives a wealth of subsurface data in terms of
Yeah,
temperature. But you also got to make sure you're staying away from oil and gas wells. So different regulatory bodies have different clearances wired there. So that's one to keep in mind from the subsurface
yeah,
confidence.
yeah, makes sense.